David Jenkins walked slowly, his worn sneakers scuffing softly against the cracked pavement of Elm Street. The morning sun, usually a cheerful harbinger of a new day, felt muted, almost apologetic, as it filtered through the grimy windows of the discount store he was approaching. He wasn't thinking about the latest video game or a new pair of shoes. His mind was on his younger sister, Lily, and the simple watercolor set she desperately wanted for her upcoming 7th birthday. He clutched the crumpled $5 bill. In his pocket, a treasure earned from weeks of odd jobs for neighbors, and felt the familiar knot of hope and anxiety tighten in his stomach. He passed Mr. Henderson's barber shop, its red and white pole spinning lazily, and then Mrs. Rodriguez's bakery, where the scent of warm bread usually made his mouth water, but today he barely registered it. His focus was solely on quality goods and more, a place he rarely visited, a place that felt out of sync with the humble rhythm of his neighborhood. As he pushed open the door, the bell above chimed a brittle, unwelcoming sound that seemed to echo the chill inside. The air, thick with the scent of cheap plastic and dust, felt heavy. He scanned the aisles, his eyes darting quickly, searching for the art supplies section, when a voice, sharp and laced with an icy disdain, cut through the quiet. "Hey, kid, you lost?" David turned, his heart giving a small lurch. Behind the counter, a man with a perpetually furrowed brow and a neatly pressed, though slightly stained, apron was glaring at him. Mr. Abernethy, the owner, was known for his brusque manner and his almost pathological suspicion of anyone who didn't fit his narrow, often prejudiced, view of respectable clientele. His polished, expensive-looking boots gleamed on the dusty linoleum floor, a stark contrast to David's scuffed sneakers. There was a palpable silence that fell over the few other customers in the store, a hushed anticipation of the inevitable confrontation. "No, sir," David replied, his voice soft but steady. "I'm looking for art supplies, for my sister." He held up the $5 bill slightly. An unspoken assurance of his intent. Mr. Abernethy's gaze, however, didn't soften. It hardened, sweeping over David's modest clothes, lingering on the slight tear in his jeans. "Art supplies, huh? Or are you just looking for an easy way to walk out with something you haven't paid for?" He pushed himself away from the counter, his movements stiff and deliberate, and began to slowly approach David. Each step of his polished boots resonated loudly in the quiet store, a deliberate intimidation. "We don't get many of your kind in here. And when we do, it's usually trouble." A flush crept up David's neck. He felt the eyes of the other customers on him, a mix of curiosity, pity, and a few, he imagined, silent agreement with Mr. Abernethy. The air grew thick with a discomfort that was almost tangible. David's hands, usually steady, felt a faint tremor. He squeezed the $5 bill tighter, the paper crinkling under the pressure. He thought of Lily's eager smile, her bright eyes when he promised her the watercolors, and a quiet determination settled within him, eclipsing the humiliation. "I just want to buy some watercolors," David repeated, his voice a little firmer now, though still respectful. "I have the money." "I saw that," Mr. Abernethy scoffed, stopping a few feet from David, his arms crossed over his chest. His eyes, cold and assessing, seemed to strip away David's composure. "But I also see a kid who looks like he's about to cause me problems. We've had issues with kids from your part of town. Now, I'm going to ask you once, Nuzley, to leave, before I have to call someone." His gaze drifted pointedly towards a small, red panic button under the counter. The injustice of it hit David with a force that stole his breath for a moment. He had done nothing wrong. He was just a boy trying to buy a birthday present for his sister. His mind raced, searching for the right words, a way to diffuse the escalating tension, but Mr. Abernethy seemed to relish the power he held. The few other customers, seemingly uncomfortable, had averted their gazes or were pretending to be engrossed in other merchandise. No one spoke up. The silence was deafening, a judgment in itself. David felt a wave of despair, a bitter taste in his mouth. Lily's disappointed face flashed in his mind. He couldn't go back empty-handed. "Sir, please," David pleaded, his voice barely a whisper now, the shame burning hot on his cheeks. I promise I'm not here for trouble. My sister ... I don't care. About your sister? Mr. Abernathy snapped, his voice rising, drawing more attention. I care about my business. Now, out! Before I make you regret stepping foot in my store. He gestured towards the door with a dismissive wave, his face contorted in a sneer. David's shoulders slumped. He knew when he was beaten. There was no point arguing with a man so clearly set in his prejudices. He took a deep, shaky breath, trying to hold back the tears that pricked at his eyes. He turned, the $5 bill still clutched in his hand, and began to walk towards the door, each step heavy with humiliation. The bell above chimed again, a mournful sound as he pushed it open, and stepped back out into the bright, indifferent sunlight. He didn't look back, but he could feel Mr. Abernathy's triumphant gaze burning into his back until he was safely around the corner, out of sight. The air outside, which had felt apologetic moments before, now felt suffocating. He walked aimlessly. For a few blocks, the vibrant colors of the neighborhood blurring into a dull haze. His promise to Lily felt like a heavy weight in his chest. Meanwhile, across town, in a sleek, glass-fronted office building, Mayor Thomas Kingston adjusted the expensive watch on his wrist, the polished metal glinting in the morning light. He was preparing for a crucial meeting with city council members regarding a new youth outreach program. His phone vibrated, a discreet buzz against the mahogany desk. It was his assistant, Sarah. Mayor, a call for you. It's David. A slight smile touched the mayor's lips. David, his adopted son, was usually the last person to call him during his busy mornings. Put him through, Sarah. David, my boy. Everything all right? Mayor Kingston's voice was warm, a stark contrast to the formal tone he used with his colleagues. On the other end, David's voice was small, choked. Dad, I got kicked out of a store. Mayor Kingston's smile vanished. Kicked out? What happened? Son? He listened, his brow furrowing deeper with each halting, tearful word David spoke. The story of Mr. Abernathy's accusations, the humiliating dismissal, the quiet prejudice, painted a stark picture in his mind. A cold anger, slow and simmering, began to brew within him. David, a boy who wouldn't steal a penny even if it meant going without, accused of being a thief simply because of the color of his skin and the perceived poverty of his neighborhood. It was a familiar, bitter narrative that still, after all these years, pierced him deeply. He thought of all the battles he had fought, all the stereotypes he had worked to dismantle, and here it was, rearing its ugly head again, directly impacting his own son. Son, Mayor Kingston said, his voice now calm, but with an underlying steel, I want you to wait for me. Don't go anywhere. I'm on my way. He hung up, his jaw tight. The city council meeting could wait. Justice for his son could not. He walked out of his office, his presence immediately commanding attention. Sarah, sensing the shift in his demeanor, looked up. Cancel my morning meetings, Sarah, all of them. And tell my driver to get the car ready. We're going to Elm Street. Elm Street, sir? Is everything all right? Sarah asked, a hint of concern in her voice. Everything, Mayor Kingston stated, his eyes steely, is about to be, or rather, it's about to be set right. The sleek black sedan pulled up quietly in front of Quality Goods and More. Mayor Kingston, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, stepped out, his posture radiating authority. He paused for a moment, letting his gaze sweep over the modest storefront, the same storefront that had just humiliated his son. David, who had been sitting on a nearby bench, looking forlorn, quickly stood up, his eyes wide with a mixture of relief and trepidation. He still clutched the $5 bill. Dad, he whispered, a tremor in his voice. Mayor Kingston placed a comforting hand on David's shoulder. It's all right, son. We'll handle this. His voice was low, for David's ears only, but it carried an undeniable strength. He pushed open the store door, the bell above chiming its familiar brittle sound. This time, however, the air inside felt different, charged with an unspoken tension. Mr. Abernathy, who had been smugly rearranging some items on a shelf, looked up, a faint frown appearing on his face as he recognized the expensive suit and the authoritative bearing of the newcomer. He didn't recognize the mayor at first, only that this was not the usual Elm Street clientele. His eyes narrowed slightly as he saw David standing beside the man. "Can I help you?" Mr. Abernethy asked, his tone still brusque, but with a subtle hint of caution now. He didn't want trouble with someone who looked like this. Mayor Kingston's gaze was steady, unwavering as he stepped further into the store. David staying quietly by his side. "Yes, you can," he said, his voice calm, measured, yet carrying an undeniable weight. "I believe you just had a customer in here who was unjustly treated." Mr. Abernethy scoffed, his bravado slowly returning. "Look, if you're here about that boy, I don't know what he told you, but he was causing trouble. I have a right to refuse service to anyone I deem a risk to my business." He puffed out his chest slightly, trying to regain his earlier dominance. He looked like he was about to steal something. "I've seen it 100 times. Mayor Kingston's eyes, however, did not waver. They held Mr. Abernethy's gaze, unblinking, unyielding. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice still quiet, almost deceptively so. "And what exactly made you deem this particular young man a risk, Mr. Abernethy?" Mr. Abernethy shifted uncomfortably under the mayor's penetrating stare. He glanced at David, then back at the mayor, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Well, he just ... He looked suspicious, his clothes. The way he was acting, you know how it is." He tried to sound casual, but his voice lacked conviction. "No, Mr. Abernethy," Mayor Kingston stated, his voice now dropping to a lower, more resonant tone that seemed to fill the small store. "I don't know how it is. What I do know is that this young man, David Jenkins, is my son. And he came in here with his own hard-earned money, not to steal, but to buy a birthday present for his little sister. A watercolor set." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, allowing their full weight to settle. The other customers in the store, who had been discreetly watching, now exchanged surprised glances. A woman at the back gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. The silence that fell was profound, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights. Mr. Abernethy's face, which had been a mask of stubborn defiance, slowly began to drain of color. His jaw sagged slightly. His eyes darted from David to the mayor, a dawning horror spreading across his features. The mayor's son. Not just any mayor, but Mayor Thomas Kingston, the man who held significant sway in this city, the man whose face was on every newspaper and television screen, the man who had championed countless initiatives for equality and community upliftment, the man he had just moments ago treated with such blatant prejudice and disrespect through his adopted son. The polished boots on the dusty floor suddenly felt less triumphant, more like lead weights. Your son?" Mr. Abernethy stammered, his voice thin, barely a whisper. The bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by a raw, exposed panic. He looked at David again, really looked at him this time, not through the distorting lens of his prejudices, but as the mayor's son, a child, still clutching the crumpled $5 bill. The shame was immediate and overwhelming. "Yes, my son," Mayor Kingston confirmed, his voice still calm, but now laced with a cold, unforgiving edge. "And what you did, Mr. Abernethy, was not only deeply offensive, but also a clear act of prejudice. You judged him not by his actions, but by the color of his skin and your baseless assumptions about his background." He stepped closer to the counter, his presence dominating the space. "My son David possesses more dignity and integrity in his little finger than many men I've met. And he deserved respect, not humiliation." Mr. Abernethy swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He seemed to shrink, his earlier posture of authority collapsing inward. The silence in the store was now a heavy, oppressive blanket. The other customers, once passive observers, now watched with a mix of fascination and quiet satisfaction. The power dynamics had shifted irrevocably. The unfair boss was now exposed, stripped bare of his authority. I didn't know," Mr. Abernethy mumbled, his eyes cast down, unable to meet the mayor's gaze. His hands, which had been so quick to dismiss David, now trembled slightly. The sight of his expensive watch on his shaking wrist seemed to mock his earlier arrogance. "Ignorance, Mr. Abernethy," Mayor Kingston said, his voice rising slightly, is not an excuse for prejudice. It is a responsibility to learn, and today you are going to learn a very important lesson. He gestured towards David. My son came here to buy a gift. He still wants that watercolor set. And you are going to sell it to him. Mr. Abernathy looked up, his eyes pleading. Of course, Mayor, immediately, anything you want. He fumbled under the counter, pulling out a small, brightly colored watercolor set. He held it out to David, his hand shaking slightly. Here, young man, please take this on the house, a gift. His voice was tight with desperation, laced with a plea for forgiveness. David, however, looked at his father. Mayor Kingston met his gaze, a silent communication passing between them. David shook his head slightly, then looked back at Mr. Abernathy. No, sir, he said, his voice regaining its quiet strength. I have my own money. He held out the crumpled $5 bill, his gaze steady, meeting Mr. Abernathy's shame-filled eyes. It was a moment of quiet power, a refusal to be bought or appeased by a gesture born of fear rather than genuine remorse. Mr. Abernathy hesitated, then slowly took the $5 bill, his fingers brushing against David's. The contact seemed to burn him. He put the money in the till, then quickly handed David the watercolor set. The transaction was complete, but the silence lingered, thick with the weight of the moment. Mayor Kingston then spoke, his voice carrying through the small store, a clear and decisive tone that left no room for doubt. Mr. Abernathy, this incident will be noted. Discrimination in any form will not be tolerated in this city. I suggest you take a long, hard look at your policies and, more importantly, your heart. Every person who walks into your establishment deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their appearance or assumptions you may harbor. He then turned to the other customers. I want to thank those of you who witnessed this. Your silent presence spoke volumes. And then Mayor Kingston did something unexpected. He turned to David and knelt down, bringing himself to his son's eye level. He placed both hands on David's shoulders. David, my son, he said, his voice full of pride and love, you handled yourself with incredible grace and strength. You showed him and everyone here what true dignity looks like. I am so incredibly proud of you. He pulled David into a warm, tight hug, a tender moment in the midst of public scrutiny. David, usually reserved, leaned into the embrace, a silent acceptance of his father's unwavering support. This moment, a powerful man publicly humbling himself to honor his son, resonated deeply within the store. When Mayor Kingston stood up, he took David's hand. Come on, son, let's go give Lily her present. As they turned to leave, a scattering of quiet applause erupted from the back of the store. It was hesitant at first, then grew, a ripple of quiet admiration. A young woman who had been silently watching from the cleaning supplies aisle stepped forward. She had been observing the entire exchange, her face a mixture of anger and sadness, remembering countless similar experiences of her own. As Mayor Kingston and David walked towards the door, she took a deep breath, and then, as if finding a newfound courage, she said, her voice clear and resonant, Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, young man. You reminded us all that kindness and respect are not privileges, but rights. Her words, simple yet powerful, hung in the air. Mr. Abernathy stood behind his counter, utterly silent, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. The ringing of the bell as Mayor Kingston and David exited the store seemed to mock him, a final, poignant note to the lesson he had just learned. He looked at the few remaining customers, their faces a mixture of disappointment and quiet condemnation. He had alienated his community, revealed his prejudice, and, perhaps most painfully, he had lost face in a profound and public way. He had found out, too late, the true identity of the poor black kid. The silence in his store felt heavier than any reproach, a testament to his own misjudgment. He would be remembered not for his goods, but for his unkindness, and that, he realized with a bitter pang, was a far more damaging legacy. He spent the rest of the day in a daze, the image of David's calm, dignified face, and Mayor Kingston's unwavering resolve burned into his mind. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his business and his reputation would never be the same. Later that afternoon, Lily's squeals of delight filled the Kingston family's elegant living room as David presented her with the watercolor set. She hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapped around his waist, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded earlier. Mayor Kingston watched them, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He knew that the fight against prejudice was ongoing, a continuous struggle, but today, in a small discount store on Elm Street, a quiet battle had been won not just by him, but by his son, David, who walked away not with bitterness, but with his dignity intact, his strength unwavering and his quiet power profoundly felt.